Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I'm Luke Freeman.
And I am Hannah Broderud. And today I am really excited to introduce Melissa Hughes as our guest. Welcome to the podcast, Melissa.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah. So Melissa, you are a keynote speaker, an author, and a self-proclaimed neuroscience geek. You've written a few books. And I've had the pleasure of getting to know you over the last few years through the No Longer Virtual annual conference hosted by Sarah Elkins, who we just had back on the podcast recently. And so it's been really great to just learn from you and with you in that setting. And today's topic I'm super excited about. We're going to talk about psychological safety and what are some implications for organizations, for leaders, for community. And but before we dive into that, could you give us a little bit of background, kind of what led you here, what created the interest in neuroscience, and maybe share a little bit about how you use that today?
Sure. So the nickel tour of my life, I guess. I started my professional career in a fourth grade classroom, and I was that teacher. I was going to change the world one child at a time. I mean, I was so passionate about what I did. And I remember the first year sitting down with my mentor, and we kind of did a post-mortem of the year. What worked well? You know, what do you need to work on over the summer? What do you want to get better at next year? And my kind of overarching question was, how in the world can I be a great teacher if I don't understand how the brain works and how the brain learns and all of those factors that enhance or impede creativity and problem solving and, you know, all of those things that we want our kids to be so engaged in. And that was really where my neuroscience geekiness started. You know, I did a lot of things along the way, but my research, my neuroscience research was really originated in that elementary school learner. And then it evolved. And what I learned over the years was, you know, all things being equal, that organizational leader wants his or her employees, his or her people, to be able to learn the best way they can. Because we're not 3 decades ago where technology was a have or a haves not. We all have the same access to information. So the difference between the best of us and the rest of us is, how do we learn? How do we learn together? And what opportunities do our folks have to share that learning with one another? Because if you can figure that out, then you are golden. And all of that is, you know, we need psychological safety for all of that. So my kids in the classroom needed a sense of psychological safety to actually let their prefrontal cortex work enough so that they could fill in the right bubbles on the Scantron sheet. But you know, when I think about people in the boardroom, people in the conference room, people brainstorming, you know, they need their prefrontal cortex to work too. And the same principles from a neuroscience perspective that apply to kids and whether they're able to learn apply to big kids and whether we're able to learn.
So, you know, I'm curious what helped you to take that leap of interest, you know, from the classroom into kind of that organizational leadership setting where you're like, okay, I now that I know this about neuroscience, like, let's take it into the business world. Tell me about how that interest got started. And then maybe if you have a story or two about, you know, how do the same principles apply organizationally as they do to maybe an individual learner?
So that's such a good question, Luke. So I started in the education space. So I taught in the classroom for 10 years, and then I left the elementary classroom and I taught at the university level for some time. And I went on to work at an educational publishing company. So I was able to write books and develop materials for teachers. So I really stayed in the education space for a good 20 years. What I guess prompted me to step out of the education space was I started to develop whole brain teaching and learning professional development opportunities for teachers. There just wasn't a lot of money for teachers to get. Sadly, we don't give our teachers a lot of opportunities for professional development. Yeah. But one of the things that I found, I was actually doing all this research. I was understanding how the brain works and all of those, what I like to say, how the brain works and how the brain quirks, because there are so many things that actually result in faulty thinking and irrational thinking. We all like to think that we're the most rational decision makers and problem solvers like all the time. Not so much. Like, we're pretty emotional, and every once in a while we get rational. But like, there are lots of things that impact our brain and how it works. And so, I was applying all these things that I was finding in a teacher sense. I was like finding real practical application for myself. And not just my work life, just life, like my relationships and how you communicate with important people in your life and how you communicate with difficult people in your life, because we all have those outside of work. So I was really finding a lot of application personally. And I remember sitting on an airplane. I was going to a conference somewhere, and I sat on an airplane. I was working on my presentation, and the guy sitting next to me was being a little bit nosy, and he kind of leaned over, and it was when Prezi was a little bit new, and he was interested in what is that, and he wanted to know. So we were kind of talking about the tool, but in talking about the tool, I was actually showing him part of my presentation. And so we had this conversation. He was a CEO of a mid-sized company, and he said, why are you doing that for the business world? Like, we need that. Like, I want that for my people. And that was actually my first corporate America speaking engagement. And it came from that conversation on the airplane. And I think what I realized after that is, those conversations, everybody gets it. Those conversations, though, when you're talking to folks in the business world, I mean, everybody wants the secret sauce to how do I keep my people engaged? How do I keep the fire like ignited in them so that they come to work and they love what they do and they do what they love? It isn't actually that hard when you understand human motivation and what drives us.
Right.
And so understanding neuroscience is all that, really,
Yeah. And you've inspired me to, it was after I first met you that I started studying neuroscience in a more, kind of formal way and got really interested in that as well. So I would say you've had an influence on me just by the passion that you had for understanding the brain and how the brain works and why that matters and why it's important, right? And I didn't mention in the introduction, but you're very accomplished. You have a PhD in education. You have also written a couple of books, Happy Hour with Einstein, which is about neuroscience, right, in practical application, and a companion workbook, Happier Hour with Einstein. And then you recently wrote an ebook, Psychological Safety in a Virtual World. Can you tell us a little bit about what led you to write this paper ebook? And then we'll get into kind of the content of it, but I'd love to hear kind of the story behind that.
Sure. So I've written a lot about psychological safety. So I know you do a lot with belonging and community and how important that is. And the last time we were together, we talked about Maslow and that hierarchy, and how now we know that it isn't like you need one and then you get the next one and then you get the next one. Like,
Right.
belonging is really key. Like, we are wired to connect to other people. And if we have, that's an ancestral hand-me-down that has actually enabled us to evolve in pretty significant ways over the years.
Yeah.
But, so I had a conversation. I was enlisted to deliver a presentation for the Asia Pacific Talent Leadership Forum. And it was folks from 7 continents, and obviously it was in the height of the pandemic, so it was virtual. But their struggle, they were kind of like everyone, trying to figure out, well, what does this pandemic mean to our new infrastructure? Like, how are we going to work? And I started to do some research, and what I found was there were some organizations that really did better during the pandemic, because they had a solid understanding of, it doesn't matter if we're in a virtual world or if we're making everyone come into the office. What matters is how they feel when they're doing their work, right? So if we can figure out what it is they need to feel passionate about their work and feel that sense of belonging with the people that they work with, it really doesn't matter if it's in the virtual world or if they come into the office, if they're sitting in their home office or if they're sitting in the conference room. What matters, though, for organizational leaders is that they have to understand that there is a different set of needs when you're sitting in your home office or your kitchen table, or, it's just different. And so when I had the conversation with these folks for the leadership forum, I started to do the research, and I thought, oh my gosh, like, everybody needs this, because everyone was facing this ridiculous challenge of, I am a firm believer that leaders want to meet the needs of their people. I just believe that they do. And I believe that the leaders who don't meet the needs of their people don't do so, not because they don't want to, but because they're not sure what those needs are. And so understanding what those needs are in a virtual world does not go away. Those needs don't go away at the end of the pandemic, because I think we have evolved the way we work. And so that's how this whole concept of psychological safety in a virtual world has come about. And we do things virtually that we would never do to our people face to face. I'll give you an example. I cannot tell you the number of Zoom calls that the call was scheduled, the meeting was scheduled, and I sat in the waiting room for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Sometimes I got completely blown off. You would never blow off your people if they came to the conference room for a scheduled meeting in the office. You just wouldn't do it. And so when you put it in perspective like that, and you think, how do you think it would make your people feel if you just completely blew them off? And it happens all the time. As a matter of fact, one of the trending questions, I belong to this kind of discussion board, and one of the trending questions, last year was, how long do you have to wait for people to show up for a Zoom call? Like, what's the etiquette? What's the protocol? Like, is it 5 minutes? Is it 10 minutes? And so I'm thinking to myself, my gosh, if this is the trending question, then this is happening to a lot of people. And it isn't just the productivity that declines, it's how people feel about their role in the organization that is severely impacted. And it just doesn't impact that person, but now it's a domino effect. It impacts how that person works with everybody else.
Yeah, thank you for that background. So it's interesting how our sense of community, our sense of belonging has shifted and to some extent gotten more acute, right, as we moved through the pandemic, because so many things were shifted around. We were operating more in virtual spaces. We were online a lot more. We were learning different etiquette with different tools. And not to mention, we were very isolated, right? And some of us who lived, personally, I lived alone during the pandemic, and it was very lonely and isolating. Others had the experience of being just on top of each other and never getting any personal space, right? Because you're with your people 24/7. You're trying to work online while your family's at home, and children need, schooling, and you have to be a teacher and a worker and a parent and a partner all at the same time, all the time. So it created, I think, a lot of people's sense of safety got disrupted as new situations, new kind of threats to our nervous system arose, right? Or were just felt more acutely. And then, there's this whole notion too about community connection and community, and how hungry people are for that. And I think the last time we were together, Melissa, in at No Longer Virtual, we also talked about this whole idea of there's been kind of a mental health crisis that has been rising, and that was accelerated by the pandemic. It wasn't caused by the pandemic, it was already happening. But as technology has enabled us to connect more with more people in more places, it has also had the effect of isolating us, right? Because we know, like, even right now, Luke and I are talking to you through a computer screen, through technology. It's awesome that we have that ability, and it enables us to do that. And when that is the primary way that we connect with people, or becomes a more frequent way to connect with people, there's a sense of isolation and loneliness that I think a lot of people are experiencing as increased anxiety, as depression, as different symptoms. So, I don't know how all that connects, but I think there's a thread there about if we can create communities where people feel like they belong and they feel safe, whether those are physical in-person communities or there are online spaces and communities where we can intentionally foster belonging by creating this sense of safety. I think there's something there, right? We had Greg Robinson on the podcast recently who talked about a lot of, fostering community. And he proposed that belonging and psychological safety are their key requirements for community. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so a couple things are coming to the surface for me on that. When you think about when you think about the stress of uncertainty. So uncertainty is the biggest stress we face. Like, if you take someone who is being tested for some kind of cancer, they're much more stressed in the time between the test and the diagnosis than they are once they know. Because once you know, then you go, okay, now I got to figure out what my options are. And the stress of uncertainty works like that pretty much across the board. I think about if you're on your way to an appointment, and your appointment starts at 2:00 and you leave at 1:15 because you're very punctual and that you care about how that represents you if you're on time or not. And there's this big accident, and you're sitting in a parking lot on the expressway, and you see the GPS numbers getting closer and closer and closer to the time of your appointment, and you can do nothing about it. You don't have the Jetsons mobile that lets you just zip out of the traffic and over top. But once you know that you're not going to make it, the stress level starts to go down, because then you move into, okay, I have to send a text, I have to send an email, I got to let this person know that I'm in. Then your brain moves into, what do I need to do about this? But until that time, your brain is just worrying. It's just about the worry. Am I going to make it? Am I going to be late? I don't know, right? So when you think about all of the uncertainty that we faced in the pandemic, the other thing to think about, and I think this is something that people underestimate, think about what we lost when we go to the office. We have all of those like informal social cues that give us information. Even if you don't have a conversation with somebody, say you walk by your boss in the hallway and you notice that he's got consternation all over his face or something, we probably wouldn't take that personally, because he's got lots of things on his plate. Like, he's worrying about something that has nothing to do with you. But you don't have a conversation there. Now, if you take it to like the virtual environment, you don't see that. And so if I send my boss a presentation that I've been working on for 2 weeks, and I'm super excited to send this off to him, and he doesn't respond for a day, and then another day, and then another day, our brains actually go to worst case scenario pretty quickly. And before long, I've convinced myself that he hates my presentation. He doesn't just dislike my presentation, he hates my presentation. It could have nothing to do with me, but I miss those social cues that, we pick up when we're in face-to-face. Same as like if you have a conversation with somebody about, did you catch the ball game last night? Those kinds of conversation actually make us feel more belonging to the folks around us. Like, it's the people like me effect. We like people who are like us. And so, if I say, go into your office, Hannah, and I see that you have a diploma on your wall from Kent State University, I go, Hannah, I went to Kent State University. Like, now all of a sudden, like, that little thing makes us feel a little bit more connected. Like, it doesn't even matter, right?
Right.
But those are the things that we miss when we're not in the office. And they sound so tiny and they sound so insignificant. But I think if leaders realize that those things really do make a difference, and they're gone. So, now there's this different opportunity though. I'm letting people into my home. Like, this is my home office. And we're actually able to see people as much more three-dimensional now. Yeah. So the challenge to leaders is, how do you use that and nurture that sense of community and belonging in your organization? You have to walk the line, but how do you nurture that in a really healthy way that makes people feel seen, heard, and valued?
Yeah. I'm curious, Luke, your thoughts as you're listening to this. You recently wrote a rewrite of Elon Musk's call to demanding everybody to be back in the office at Tesla and his different companies, Tesla and SpaceX, I believe. And should leaders allow people to continue to work from home, or should they have a right to demand people to be in the office? And I think they certainly have that right, but it's often in how we do that. But rather than talking about that specific communication, I'm curious about, I wonder, is part of the reason leaders are now, even companies that said maybe we will never go back to an office environment, are reversing on that? Is it because they haven't quite figured out how to do this well in a virtual or online environment with remote work? What are your thoughts, Luke or Melissa?
Yeah, so I haven't learned how to do this well yet. I think that's an interesting question, because I would ask back, how many supervisors or leaders really knew how to create psychological safety well in the first place. We know that 70% of what drives employee engagement is someone's relationship with their direct supervisor. And that in spaces with low engagement, it's a leader problem. It's not do they have the tools to do their job, or do they understand the purpose of the organization problem quite as much. And so I don't know, that sparks for me this idea that all leadership development is kind of retraining to some degree. Whenever I read the psychological safety book, I think, yes, this is awesome. I totally agree. This is what leaders need to know. And I think if I'm a leader listening to this, I'm tempted to think, oh, well, how do I teach my leaders the behaviors that they need to exhibit to create psychological safety? And I think my answer back would be like, well, what do we need to retrain? Like, what behaviors that we're doing do we need to replace with better, newer behaviors that create more psychologically safe environments and can promote community and belonging and cohesiveness, collaboration, all those great outcomes of a place where there's psychological safety. So I don't know, a little bit of rambling, but that's kind of what this sparks for me. What I'm curious about is maybe to go back to the beginning and just ask Melissa, like, what is psychological safety? Like, what's the definition? We've been throwing it out. I think the three of us probably have a little bit of shared understanding, but clinically, if you were going to define it, like, what is this thing that we're talking about?
Well, if you really want to understand psychological safety, then you have to get to know Amy Edmondson, and she is kind of the mama of psychological safety. She's got a couple books, she's got a couple TED Talks. I actually think that the way she explains not just what it is, but how to get there is just brilliant. But one of the things that she says that really sticks with me is, psychological safety is being able to raise your hand and ask questions. It's having the ability to say, man, I screwed up, and know that that's going to be embraced as, well, tell us about it, because we want everybody to learn from that mistake, right? It's having the ability to challenge the status quo. What's the old saying? The 7 most expensive words in business are, this is the way we've always done it. And so, what she says is, if psychological safety is that ability to ask questions, share mistakes, challenge the status quo, and know that you are going to be seen, valued, and heard for that contribution. I mean, if you think about psychological safety in the sense of contribution, your ability to make a contribution to the community, you're not going to be ostracized, you're not going to be humiliated, you're not going to be called out. Instead, the culture is such that we expect people to raise their hand and ask questions. We expect people to challenge the status quo. And when you think about the organizations that really did the pandemic well, I mean, everybody went home and worked at home for a while. Like, everybody. If anything, the pandemic kind of evened the playing field. The organizations that did really well said, this is all about how my people feel about how they do their work now. Mm-hmm. And so in the ebook that I wrote, the top 3 factors are, they want consideration for the job that they're doing. They want recognition. They want support. And the organizations that really did the pandemic well said, I can support my people. I can recognize my people. Like, it's just different. You have to do it in a different way. And you have to recognize, where are the gaps now? Because you could recognize someone just by having a very casual, informal exchange as you walked out of the coffee room, right? And now you can't do that. So I think for me, the big thing about psychological safety is that I'm going to go back to those kids in the classroom. that kid who's afraid to raise his hand and say, I don't get it. Like, I just don't get it. Now there's probably, the old saying, there's 5 other kids that have the same question. That applies to big kids too. And when you think about safety in terms of I feel safe, that's how the thinking part of your brain gets to engage. I mean, so if you think about how the brain develops from bottom to top and back to front, so the prefrontal cortex is the part right behind your forehead. That's the last part to develop, and that's where all the heavy duty stuff happens. The neurological priorities follow the order of development. So our priorities are first to keep us safe, second to feel, because that's what separates us from potato bugs. We have emotions and we feel. And third to think, third to problem solve, third to all the stuff, the executive functions, that impulse control, weighing risk and reward. All of that happens in the prefrontal cortex, but that's the third priority. We're not going to do that unless we're safe and unless we feel like we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And, when I think about applications for a leader, I think those 3 things: am I safe? How do I feel about the situation I'm in? And then cognitively, how do I problem solve, in this moment? Like, we have to give those first to our team members. And where I see organizations falling down is where there's a little bit of a role reversal, where we expect as an organization or as an organizational leader that, well, my job is to do the problem solving, and then your job is to feel good about the solution I've come up with and trust that I'm going to keep you safe, even if I haven't spoken explicitly to that. And when we think about, even going virtual or remote during the pandemic, I saw this in several organizations that we worked with, where the primary questions were, if people take their monitors home, how do we track all of that equipment? If someone needs a chair for their home office, can they get reimbursed for that? Those were how are we going to schedule our meetings to make sure that the work continues to get done? And so overarching from a leadership, like the things that executive leadership teams are talking about, right? They're focused on problem solving instead of how are we creating an environment during this change, during this transition, where people know that their safety is our primary concern. How do we feel about this? And how do we help other people navigate how they feel about it? And then guess what? If we do those things right, like, people will be committed to one another as a community, and they'll solve the logistical problems. And I think, that's so antithetical to the history of Western civilization business, the last couple 100 years, that it was not natural for people to do that. And here we are halfway through 2022, and I'm just now having conversations with people who, and these are executive leaders, they're realizing not everyone's going to come back, and they're sad about it. And they're feeling a sense of loss. And for 50 years, for some of them, this is the way that they've experienced community and meaning in their life. And now it's different, and they don't know how to process that emotion. And I'm just kind of, if I could speak to myself 2.5 years ago, I think I'd go back and say, how are we talking about loss and change from an organizational leadership perspective? And how are we holding on to what's core about whatever this culture is that we have, that we care about, and being able to mourn the change, but kind of let go of old ways of doing things? And I think if we were to do that, a lot of leaders would have better outcomes in the engagement, the collaboration, and the output and dedication of their teams.
That is so true. We talk about the team members having the psychological safety they need to be innovative and to be problem problem solvers and all of that, but leaders need to have psychological safety too. And I'm going to tweak those questions just slightly.
Yeah.
The survival brain, am I safe? The feeling brain, I'm going to use the L word, am I loved? And when I use the L word, love, I just mean, do I belong? Do people care about me being here or not? And then the thinking brain is, what can I learn from this? What can I teach from this? And as organizational leaders, they're going through those, their brains work just the same as everybody else's. And so they're doing that same tiered inventory as well. Am I safe? Am I loved? What can I learn from this? What can I teach? Right? So I think one of the things that organizational leaders can do is model. It's okay to say, I have a question. It's okay to say, can you teach me how to do this? Because in doing so, you invite others to follow your lead. And to another point that you made about, everybody has a horrible boss story, and I have one too. And I'm not going to share the whole horrible boss story, but, and this was years ago, and I won't say who the company is.
We'll put a link to the boss's LinkedIn profile in the show notes.
So I had reported to the CEO for many years, and he trusted me, and in exchange for that trust, I never wanted to let him down. Like, I always wanted to over deliver, right? And I took that very seriously. And then I started to report to a new person. I got a new supervisor person, and I lived like an hour and a half away, and the previous CEO said, you figure it out. You're a grown up. If you have to be in the office, come into the office. But if you can work from home, and this was before the remote thing was
a thing
really accepted, he said, I trust that you're going to work wherever you are. And like I said, in exchange, when somebody trusts you, you want to deliver. Yeah. Fast forward, I got a new boss, and his question was, how will I know if you're working? And my answer was, what? By my work product. And it was so foreign to me that he would not trust me, and I gave it 6 months. I gave it a good old college try. And I was a brand evangelist. I loved my company. I loved what we did. I loved everything about my job. I loved my team. And then I lasted 6 months, and I was like, I cannot do this. So when you go back to those organizations who really did the pandemic well, it wasn't about where the people were working, or if we're going to fund a chair, or if we're going to let them take their monitors home, there were logistics to figure out. Obviously, every organization had to do that. But the ones who really succeeded were the ones that said, how are my people feeling?
Yeah.
Do they feel like I trust them? Yeah. Do they feel like they're connecting with other people? Do we have, a place and a way to make them feel a sense of belonging? And are we giving them opportunities to learn? And are we giving them opportunities to teach? Because if you can do all of those things, your people will move mountains to deliver.
Man, what a powerful message, right? And also a reminder of, something we say frequently, and that the research proves out, is that people don't leave companies or organizations, they leave leaders.
That's right.
And, I've had similar experiences where there's been a leadership shift and everything changed. And my experience of being part of that organization became very different. Right. And it had a lot to do with some of the things that you just described, right? Was trust extended? Was there autonomy? Was there, a sense of safety that it's okay to try things, and it's okay to mess up or fall short, because there's this safe space that we can say, I messed up, or I need help, right? I'm not quite sure how to, approach this, or I feel a lack of motivation to work on this, or I don't know, I I'm busy and I don't know if I can meet this deadline in time, right? Being able to voice those things without feeling like you're going to get your head cut off, right? That can lead to much more productive collaboration and just stronger outputs, right? Than if people feel like they have to hide and cover for themselves because they don't feel safe. So we've talked a lot about, what is psychological safety. Luke, something you sparked when you were talking about, okay, our message to our people should be your safety is our first concern, right? My head, when I hear that, immediately goes to physical safety, right? So if there's like an event, like a weather event, that's often the communication that comes out. So, but I don't immediately think when I hear that your psychological safety is our first concern. So that made me think, Melissa, from a neuroscience perspective, how does the brain differentiate between physical safety and psychological safety? What happens in the brain when we feel threatened at some level? And what is the difference, or is there a difference?
There's not much. There's not much difference. So the brain does not differentiate. It's very hard for the brain to differentiate between being chased by a tiger and being yelled at by your boss in front of your peers. So one of the biggest threats to our psychological safety is a threat to our social status. What that means is it like that's very important to us, that the people around us see us as competent and contributing and valuable members of the team. And if we're ignored or dismissed or embarrassed or ostracized for, offering up a suggestion, that's a threat to our social status. And that is integral to who we are. I mean, think about when somebody loses their job. We've all been there. We know someone who has lost their job and actually lost a piece of their identity. I mean, that's so woven into the fabric of our being. And the brain does not do a very good job of determining, is this a physical threat or a psychological threat? The other thing is the brain processes social pain the same way it processes physical pain. The exact same parts of the brain light up when you feel socially, I'm going to use the words the kids use, dissed, right, by somebody. Then if you stub your toe or break your arm or fall down steps or, and it's interesting because if somebody has a physical injury, we don't say, like, if somebody falls down the steps and breaks their leg, we don't say, oh, shake it off, you have another one. Like, what's the problem, right? We don't do that, but we really do tend to minimize those psychological injuries. And women are emotional and men are needy if they raise their hand too much, or that's a really hard thing to identify for a lot of people. And I just don't mean leaders. I mean, it's really hard for each of us to identify if somebody is having their psychological safety is being threatened. So how do we get there? Well, that requires some real open, transparent communication and organizational trust. I know a leader who says, I don't care about your accomplishments. What I care about are your mistakes. Because if you can share your mistakes, then everybody learns from that and we can save everybody time. And so his philosophy is we become a learning community, not by sharing all the stuff we get right, but by sharing all the stuff we don't get right. And it's really, really interesting to me that, when you talk to his people, there's a high level of psychological safety because the expectation is share the mistakes so that we learn. And what he has done is he has given everyone permission not just permission, but the expectation. And it is remarkable that people are so willing to share those things, and they do it with the spirit of, I'm sharing this mistake with you because I don't want anybody else to make that same mistake. So when you think about contribution, the contribution that they're making is valuable. They're saving time, they're saving money, right, for the organization. So I think it all goes back to, how do people feel about the job that they do?
Yeah.
And, are they able to make contributions that really speaks to the person that they are, and the passion? Like, we talk about kids and learning styles. Every kid has their own learning style. Well, people have their own working styles.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we incorporate that into the way we let people work?
So this is an interesting, thought question just that comes up for me, because when you say that, I hear this echo in my mind of leaders I've heard, and even in high achieving individuals, that will say, well, it doesn't matter how I feel about it, I just need to do the work. Or a leader will be like, I don't care how they feel about it, it needs to get done. Why does it matter how we feel about our work?
Well, here's an example. If I'm really good at something and I can, I don't even have to think about it, I can do that thing in my sleep. Not everybody has that same level of ability on that thing. Likewise, somebody else out there is going to be way better at something else than I am. I will struggle getting that thing done. So there are two things here. If you really want people to cooperate and to be collaborative, not just cooperative, but collaborative, and build a learning community, then it takes being able to say, I'm really good at this. Here, let me show this to you. And think about, if you're really passionate about something, you want to share that with other people, right? If you're not passionate about it, whatever. There's an emotional contagion at work there, because I am that girl who, when I learn something new, some new research study about the brain, watch out, I want to share it. Like, I'm super jazzed about that, and I want to share that with you. That's the passion. That passion that is contagious. That excitement is contagious. To those leaders who say, I don't care how they get it done, I don't care how they feel about it, I just want it to get done. Then I would say, there are probably half of your people can do it with no passion whatsoever. The other people are not going to learn from that, because why would I be excited about something that you're not excited about? So, would you cut your workforce in half and just tell half of them go home? Because that's kind of what you're doing if you don't care that half of your workforce is not engaged. If they're just going through the motions. I mean, if you're making widgets, okay, maybe. But we have machines that can make widgets now. I say that in my paper. Why bother to hire the best and the brightest if you're not going to create the conditions for them to be the best and the brightest?
Yeah, I love that. I saw that, right? Why bother hiring the best thinkers if you don't create the conditions necessary for them to do and share their best thinking?
Yeah,
Because it's not just that you want them to do their best thinking and deliver their best performance, but you want them to share that. You want that to go viral in your organization. You want that to be the thing that fuels everyone else. And believe me, when you have that going for you, that is a powerful force.
Yeah. It reminds me of a few projects we've done with kind of enterprise level project management offices. So maybe they're doing a large technology implementation or another change management project. And we essentially come in and facilitate team development of those cross-functional teams for the project management office. And our goals are a few different things. We want really high role clarity for that multidisciplinary work group. We want really high purpose clarity. What is it that they're trying to accomplish? Does everyone have the same narrative that they're working off of? And then is there a really high degree of trust, or to use this language, psychological safety, so that we can collaborate effectively? And we really had a breakthrough with this when we were talking with the project manager, and they're like, this is an investment to steward the money we've already put on the table. All of these hours and this product we're implementing, or whatever the project is, right? It costs, whatever it is, $5-10 million. So why would we not take the time, an extra 5% of our resource, to do this work and ensure that this is going to be successful? Because if you look at the stats for those big projects, like, it's pretty dismal, right? Your chances of successfully implementing something or doing a big change management thing, like, you're fighting the odds just to get ROI on the project. And so, yeah, why not spend 5% more time, energy, effort to ensure that team have the trust necessary and the clarity necessary to be successful? So I tell that story to say, I think what you're saying is that the same thing applies to the talent that we have invested in. Mm-hmm. If I have invested in really smart, really capable people, why would I not take another 5% of my time, 5% of my leadership effort, 5% of my resource, whatever it is, to invest in a psychologically safe atmosphere, a climate where people can collaborate and do their best work? It's only a stewarding of my resources, right? It's just me saying, I've already spent the money to get the people here. Now I want to get ROI. So I've got to do X, Y, Z to make sure that we can be successful. And I don't really think of it any differently than a compensation and benefits equation if you want to monetize it. I kind of hesitate to make it so transactional. But for the economists out there, you can kind of monetize it and say, okay, I have to pay people a certain amount, I have to give them a certain amount of benefits, support, policy support, whatever that is. Well, yeah, of course they're going to leave if they don't have some baseline compensation. Well, a part of that is psychologically safe atmosphere in the workplace if they want to do their best work. If we believe that people want to show up and do their best work, this is a form of compensation to keep them on board. So I don't know, just some things that it sparks for me.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I always think this employee that you just hired today, if he's just kind of sort of engaged, like 60% engaged, and you do nothing to develop that person, and he's okay with being 60% engaged. Think about it. If he sticks around for 10 years, he's going to be exactly the same in 10 years as he is today. Are you okay with that? Like, he's not just going to magically evolve and, become a problem solver and an innovator. That doesn't happen by, that you have to create the conditions for that to happen. And the reality is it's not really that hard, because people thrive on challenge. The human brain loves challenge. Like, I think about the Goldilocks rule. Like, if you think about a rubber band. So a rubber band is useless if it's not kind of tight. It doesn't do anything if it's not, if it doesn't have any tension. But if there's too much tension, the rubber band breaks. For the rubber band to work the way the rubber band is supposed to work, there's got to be just enough tension. And the human brain works the same way. When we are challenged with something and there's just enough tension, we want to figure that out. It's driving me nuts. I want to figure that thing. Like, I want to do that thing. I want to learn that next thing. That's when your people are going to be like constantly pushing. That challenge needs to be just almost out of reach.
Yeah. And
because what happens is then the brain floods with dopamine. Once they get that thing, then there's this eureka, I did it, the dopamine rush. And then you want to get the dopamine rush again. And so that's what drives you the next time. But if you're only operating at 60%, there's no dopamine rush. It's like the rubber band that's just sitting on the table doing nothing. There's no
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a seed, right? All the DNA exists in the seed to grow it into a tree, but if you drop it on the sidewalk, it's not going to turn into a tree. Like, it needs water and it needs sunshine, and then it's going to do its thing and grow. And I think it's silly that we don't think about people the same way, right?
Yeah.
We can't just plop them somewhere and think they're going to transform, but it's not that complex what they need. I think this is one of those, people always, if there's a simple solution, but it's hard, people will look for a complex but easy solution.
Yeah.
Right. So if the simple solution is I consume less calories than I eat and I exercise a little bit, and like that leads to higher levels of cardiovascular health. Okay, that's simple, but that's really hard to execute on that. So I'm going to go buy P90X or buy this piece of equipment or whatever it is. And I'm going to have a really complex, I'm going to buy all my prepackaged meals, right? I'm going to sign up for this subscription. And it's really complex, but I'm attempting to make it easier for myself. And I think when we talk about development of people, that's the message that I want leaders to hear, is that this is a discipline and a practice that for the most part is simple. If someone reads your book on psychological safety, there's everything included in there for them to be a more effective leader. Mm-hmm. Now, it's not easy though. You have to prioritize things differently. You have to make time for things. You have to keep it top of mind for yourself. Maybe you have to read it once a week for the next 6 weeks, right? Those are all simple things, not complex, but challenging. So I do think this is a good time to segue into practical takeaways. What do people do? And I know, you referenced leveraging flow states, which is, bringing the level of challenge up to the level of capability for someone, and then leveling up the level of challenge so that the person has to stretch just a little bit, an appropriate way. It's not so far out of reach that they can't get there, right? That's leveraging psychological flow for people to grow. You can also think of it as gamification of work, right? How do we as leaders consciously do that? What are some other practical tips, tricks for creating psychological safety and creating workspaces where people can be themselves, can admit mistakes, can feel like they belong in a meaningful way?
Well, I think the first thing to remember is that people are unique and different things motivate people in different ways. And as a leader, it's unrealistic to believe that you would know what drives every person in every different situation. So I think the first suggestion that I would make is ask people, what do you need to be successful? What do you need to be more engaged? What do you need to be able to make more contributions to the team? Well, I value you. I want to make sure that you're as successful as you can be because you're valuable to the team. And so I think when you ask people, it frames it differently. It's, oh wow, that person A cares about me, B wants me to be successful, and C isn't acting like just follow the rules in the binder and you'll get along fine in this company. And by asking what is it you need, the implication is people are different and I want to make sure that you have what you need to succeed. So that would be the first thing. And, I have lots of conversations with organizational leaders too, and sometimes I'll say, when was the last time you asked your people what they need? And they're like, huh? Try it. Pick a few people. I take that one person who maybe is at a 60% engagement level and say, we're not meeting your needs. Make it about you. Help me. What can we do to meet your needs better? Because I think what happens is it makes people feel like they're worthy of understanding of, whatever that thing is. And of course, if the person says, well, I need, what I need is 50 grand more a year, that's different, right? But if somebody says, you know what, I need to be able to be a team leader on projects once in a while. Isn't that what you want? Like, don't you want people to step up in those kinds of ways? And here all along you thought that it was a 60% engagement level because the kid's a slacker. No, the kid wants more challenge. The kid wants more responsibility. And I use the kid lovingly, but I think until we have those conversations, we make an awful lot of unfair assumptions about people and why they're not engaged. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is model it. So when a leader or anybody says, "Hey, I'm really struggling with this project, but you're so good at X. Do you have any time? Can you I don't know, share some insight that might help me get that thing done?" You elevate that other person. You recognize that that other person has some skill set that not everybody does. And you model this construct that we're not all going to have all the answers to all the questions. The people that are going to be able to get it done are the people that know who to go to to get what they need. It used to be you hired that person who had all the answers, and now you hire the person who knows how to get the information they need. And so as a leader, by asking those questions, you model that it is okay not to know everything. We do not expect you to have all of the answers and know all of everything that there is to know. We do expect you to be resourceful and be able to raise your hand and ask questions, and it's okay to say, "I don't know." So, those are the two easier things for most leaders. And I would just say, remember that the brain is a very quirky muscle, and while we think we know everything that's going on, we often know very little about what's going on in the brains of other people. And the best way to understand where they are in a psychological safety perspective or in a belonging perspective is to ask them, "How are you feeling?"
Well, the tricky thing with that is, unless there is some level of psychological safety, you may not get an honest answer when you ask. Right. And that's why it's hard. But I agree. Ask the questions and create that culture where it's okay to ask questions and ask for clarification and ask for what people need and what they really want.
Yeah, because it'll backfire really fast if you ask the question and then you don't deliver.
Yes.
It's the company that does all the surveys and all the questionnaires ad nauseum, and you write the same thing on every survey and nothing ever changes. And
you stop responding to the survey.
That's right. That's right. Yep. So you're absolutely right. There has to be a level of psychological safety for people to be honest. And if you start to ask those questions, the first couple are going to be really important, that you handle them well. Because people will say, "Hey, I took my problem to Jim and he made changes and I feel better, and I think you should go talk to Jim because Jim will listen to you." Or, "Jim asked me what I thought and I told him and nothing happened."
Right.
Yeah. A couple of themes that I'm hearing here that echo through a lot of change work is this idea of, you said, we did, or you said and I did. Here's what I heard you say last week. Here's what I've done about it. Here's why I can't do anything about it, or here's why this is what I was able to do. What do you think? Right? Cycle that through 3-4 weeks in a row, and all of a sudden you're going to have a different climate on your team. And the other thing is just real clarity on who's responsible for the climate of a team. It's the leader.
Yeah.
And so, if you're not taking accountability for the results that you're getting, what we see people, the temptation we see people kind of caving to is this idea that they blame the workforce or they blame the team rather than taking accountability for the outcomes, and rather than saying like, I'm the person that has all the levers to pull. And the cop out there is that these people don't want to work hard. These people don't want to be honest. These people just always want to raise, these people, whatever, right? Instead of owning at some point, this is a matter of belief, like everyone wants to do a good job.
Yeah.
But for the most part, everyone wants to do a good job. Everyone wants a say in what they do. Everyone wants to be growing in their mastery of what they're doing. Everyone wants to have meaningful connection at work. So those are in our DNA, right? So if those things aren't happening, there's something around the system that I, as a leader, am accountable for that needs to be fixed. Yeah. And I think if we start there as leaders, it should change our priority, right? Instead of solving some logistical problem, I'm solving what's happening in the system that I'm responsible for leading that's producing the outcomes that I'm getting. And just like we've talked about today, like there's a lot of really simple things that we can do to change the outcome, change the experience of our folks.
I like to use I call it the PAM principle. If you have purpose, you have autonomy, and you have mastery, you're golden. Like those are the things that will drive you to accomplish whatever it is: purpose, autonomy, and mastery. Because if you have purpose, then you have the drive. If you have autonomy, then somebody trusts you to do something. And then if you have the opportunities to develop and the mastery, then that's how you reach your goals, no matter if they're personal goals or professional goals.
I love that. So as we wrap up this conversation, Melissa, this has been just really insightful. It's always a joy to talk with you. And I want to, encourage people to explore your work further. One takeaway for me is that I want to continue to explore this link between psychological safety, belonging, and community. So that's, what this conversation has kind of sparked for me. I want to dive a little deeper. And I thought you had you have 6 affirmations in a culture of belonging in your ebook that I think it's worth just sharing as we close out here. But these, how many of the following statements that employees can affirm determine not only how engaged they are individually, but also how the organization performs as a whole. And so I'll just read them off, and then I'll encourage people to explore your work further. But number 1, belong. I belong with my company. If people feel that way, they feel more connected, and we're going to have better outcomes. Number 2, believe. I believe in my company. Number 3, live values. I know and live my own core values and strengths in my work. Number 4, join stories. I know and live my personal strategic story and can join it with my company's strategic story without conflict. And we like to think of that as purpose as well. I know and live my personal purpose, and I can join it with my company's purpose without conflict. And number 5, practice. I understand and given authorship and take ownership of my work and welcome how I am measured. And finally, number 6, grow. I understand, define, and take ownership for how I grow and how I contribute to the growth of the company. So for me, those are just some real key takeaways that I want to reflect more on, and think about how we can help leaders implement this kind of culture of belonging. Melissa, it's been such a joy to have you on today. If people want to connect with you, how can they find you? How can they find your work and contact you?
Okay, I have to go back to those 6 affirmations. So that was adapted from Paul Hari's work. He has done some amazing work on belonging. He is actually referenced in the ebook, so I didn't steal his work, but I want to give him the appropriate shout out for that because it's great stuff. And you can find his stuff in the ebook. If you want to find the ebook, you can find it on my website, which is melissahughes.rocks, ROCKS. Also, I send out a Neuro Nugget every Friday, and it is not salesy because I actually suck at that, but it is just like some fascinating nugget about the brain that I just have to share with the world. It's a 3 to 5 minute video with a associated blog post. So if you want that, you can sign up for that. And I don't sell you anything, actually.
All right, Luke, you want to close us out?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks everyone for joining today. And thanks Melissa and Hannah for the conversation. If you want to find out more about what we do, you can go to purposeandperformancegroup.com and all of these things. We would love to get you connected with Melissa, would love to talk to you around how do you become a more intentional leader? How do you create workplaces where psychological safety is the norm and you get higher performance outcomes because you do some of this work? Like say the soft stuff is the hard stuff. And it's super hard. You can't go get a degree in the same way that a lot of people get an engineering degree. So we're here to help you with that. Reach out if we can in any way. And thanks so much for spending time today. Hope everyone has a good one.
Magic in the Room is hosted by Chris Province, Hannah Bratteroo and Luke Freeman, and produced by Ben West. Theme music is by Evan Grimm. Title track Fake Love available on Apple Music. And this podcast was recorded at Storycatcher Studio with video and audio editing and production support by Brad O'Hara and Alicia Crum, with inspiration, strategy and technical support by yours truly, Neil Hughes. Magic in the Room is a production of Purpose and Performance Group. You can find us at purposeandperformancegroup.com, and remember, previous episodes are available at magicintheroom.com.